Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Corner, the weekly news and views update brought to you right here from Lansing, your state capital. Well, the big event this week around early childhood activities was certainly our annual Star Power Advocacy Day. Star Power went off this week in an unprecedented fashion. We had an incredible turnout. Despite some early morning rain showers, it's turned out to be a fairly nice day. We had a huge parade from the Lugnut Stadium all the way to the Capitol. We had an excess of 5,000 people attend Star Power this year. It's just been truly tremendous, and it's been a great activity and event for letting our legislators know that investment in quality early childhood programs is a priority for their constituents, and it should be for them as well. On the budget front, things continue to move along relatively quickly. The big news this week was the Revenue Estimating Conference that happened on Monday. If you remember last week, we talked about it a little bit, but the numbers did come out on Monday and showed that what people had anticipated, that there is an increase or a surplus in revenues over what was projected earlier in the year. This should make the decisions that the legislators have to make and the governor has to make on next year's fiscal budget a little bit easier. And it's being reported right now that there's already a tentative agreement in place, or the framework at least of an agreement, between Governor Snyder, Senate Majority Leader Richardville, and House Speaker Bolger on what to do for the fiscal year 2012 budget. It's anticipated that they'll use a good portion of the new revenues, about $300 million, to help offset some of the school aid fund cuts. If you remember, this is one of the more contentious pieces of the governor's proposal, and it's been debated by the legislature through this process. So it looks like they'll end up putting a good chunk of that money into the school aid fund budget to help offset some of the proposed cuts to education and to K-12 schools in particular. We are certainly hopeful that the early childhood programs that have been fairly well funded throughout the process, or at least been positioned to be supported positively by the legislature throughout the process, will still at least maintain maintain levels of funding for next year. It's difficult to know at this point whether or not there'll be any increases in the preschool line, although one of the proposals that's been floated out there does have a slight increase for preschool funding. On the general fund side, there are still some issues that still need to be worked out, but they have a framework of a deal on the general fund side as well. The subcommittees have been given target numbers, or are in the process of being given target numbers as we speak, and so they're going to have to negotiate out the final details of the differences between the House and Senate versions of the budget. If you remember earlier in the process, one of the big differences on the Department of Human Services side was on the Child Care Development Fund line. So that's an area that we're certainly looking for, looking closely at as these final negotiations continue. I would expect that the final budget is wrapped up as early as next week, which would certainly put the legislature in a position to meet their artificially self-imposed deadline of May 31st on this fiscal year budget, which is quite remarkable, really, given all that they've had to deal with. So stay tuned and tune in again, please, next week, where we'll have another update and maybe even a final version, or at least most of a final version of what we can expect in next year's fiscal year's budget. Once again, this is Matt Gillard, and thanks for tuning in to Capital Corner.